Welcome to Brokers Digest, a weekly webcast by The Edge Singapore, where we discover stock opportunities with you. This episode is made possible by TD Ameritrade Singapore.
Welcome to another episode of The Edge Singapore's Brokers Digest with me, Amala Balakrishna. Joining me today is Christopher Brankin, Chief Executive Officer of TD Ameritrade Singapore. Welcome back to the show, Chris. How have you been?
Oh, great. It's missed you last week, but I had some other engagements. But excited to be on here this week for this evening, and then going into tomorrow evening in terms of the U.S. elections. So I definitely think we have some things that are interesting for our viewers to hear about today.
Yes, we missed you too, and so much has happened since we spoke, especially in the last week. So if we just take a look at how the market performed, the 30-stock Dow Jones Index closed down a significant 6.47% for the week on Friday, October 30th, while the Nasdaq was down 5.51%. Similarly, the S&P 500 plunged 5.64% from the week before. So this is the three indices' worst performance since the March 20th portion when the coronavirus infections were fast increasing. So Chris, does this performance take you by surprise?
A little bit. I think we all expected some volatility heading into the U.S. elections. And couple that with, the coronavirus kind of upticking in the U.S. and across Europe. And then finally, just that the stimulus payments or that stimulus kind of check has never come through yet in the United States. It kind of become more of a political point, that they didn't want to have the check go out before the election to potentially sway voters one way or the other. So I think a lot of these things have maybe kind of driven the overall sentiment and just markets down a little bit more than some would have anticipated. But I still think we're going to have some volatility tonight and tomorrow night as we head into the election. And then hopefully we actually get we know who the winner is sometime within 24 hours after the polls close.
Yes. So in terms of specific counters, Chris, the major tech stocks were badly affected, with stocks of Apple, Amazon, Twitter, and Facebook dropping quite a bit. So over here we have the average daily values of some of these counters. So Chris, these are actually counters that we have been pointing out to our viewers in our previous episodes. So do you reckon that they should still be putting their money into these counters?
Well, I think big tech is still is an interesting sector in terms of where people are looking for value. I think having a little bit of a pullback here and some of the names, generally, we see our customers at TD Ameritrade take that as an opportunity to buy. If you look at some of the earnings reports from Apple and Amazon, the numbers were fantastic. I mean, Apple basically had a record September. Amazon's already at a record year, with a little more than 2 months to go. So lots of these numbers were relatively good. And we've seen our customers at TD Ameritrade, just from our investor movement index, that they have actively been buying in this space. The one area, the name that you mentioned, Twitter, is something that our customers have actually been net sellers of. So a little bit of difference in terms of where that is, but we continue to see our customers being actively involved in these sectors. And if you look at the earnings report and you think that this is potentially an area that maybe was a little bit oversold, we do think our customers are going to continue to be active in this space as these numbers have been quite robust, not only from a trading side, but also from an activity just in general.
Okay, so market watchers are actually saying that the performance of big tech counters like the ones that we have just discussed is a signal that the Democrat campaigner Joe Biden could just be America's next president. So this seems quite plausible. When I last checked on 1st of November, Biden was in the lead. He has actually, reports say that he has asked Trump to go home. So as comical and as amusing as this is, what are your thoughts, Chris? How do you think the sector will perform if the Biden administration really takes over in the next few days?
Sure. So first, we try and tell our customers, hey, look, it's not your job to predict on which way stocks are maybe going up and down. And it's even harder to predict who's actually going to be the next president of the United States and how that will impact your investments in a near term. So essentially, if you like the customers or the companies or the sectors that you're in, and you see some of the short-term volatility, we try and tell people to not pay so much attention just to the noise in the market, but look for the overall relative value. And if it's a company that you want to be invested in, whether that's Apple, Amazon, any of the big techs, and you've seen some downward movement, like maybe that's not the time that you look to panic to get out. So I think, if you look at the polls and you believe the polls that, Biden, might be headed towards a victory here come tomorrow night in the States, there are some areas, like you said, with the big tech that potentially might benefit from that. And they might benefit from it based on that he has basically promised to spend more on infrastructure spending around some of these products that are in there. And I think the flip side of that coin, though, is when you have the big tech companies, the ones that are taxed more, and you potentially have a Democratic administration, is sometimes that is a potential headwind, because if the more company makes, and if corporate taxes go up even the slightest amount, that's generally kind of a headwind for these big tech stocks. So kind of a mixed bag in terms of big tech, in terms of where the value and where the stock prices are going. But I definitely think that as people understand who's going to be in the White House, we'll get a little more clarity in terms of the big tech space.
Yep. Chris, I just want to jump in there and ask you about the tech infrastructure space that you just mentioned briefly about. So Biden has promised more support for 5G and artificial intelligence and other initiatives that will boost the performance of this sector. So how do you think big tech infrastructure players like Fastly, for example, will perform in the coming weeks?
Well, that's the, I think that we're the positive side of that coin is in terms of, if we start seeing more in the infrastructure spending, we get a really, a drive towards improving 5G across the United States. Is those are areas that we see potential strength, and certain players are well positioned in that space. So that's the positive side. The negative we already mentioned, so I think it's maybe a little bit too early to tell, but there are people that are kind of making bets on both sides of that market so far.
Right. So actually, Chris, another form of tech companies that have been doing very well lately is Biotech, especially with the demand for pharmaceuticals this year from the coronavirus outbreak. So over here, we have the likes of Scholar Rock Holding and Novavax, who we have also been talking about for quite a few episodes. And they were among the top traded counters in the biotech sector last week. So how do you reckon these companies in the sector will perform in the coming months, be it under the Biden administration or as we progress in terms of finding a vaccine for the coronavirus?
Sure. Like this particular sector, I think, has gotten maybe more politicalized than it should be. You even saw the CEO from Pfizer, last week coming out saying, hey, look, the Tuesday presidential election is not a timetable that we're working with. We're trying to work towards a solution, that gives us a cure to this virus, not based on, whether the U.S. election is on Tuesday or not. You do have other companies, like, the Scholar Rock Holdings that, it's not just coronavirus that people are working on. This was a big breakthrough in terms of the mid-stage results for spinal muscular atrophy. So these are, that would be a major breakthrough in terms of for that potential company. And you saw the stock price on that was, up, over 100% last week. So you saw major moves on that, because that is definitely a huge news in that space. But I continue to say this, and it is going to be the fact here for a while. So goes the coronavirus, so goes the markets, and so goes kind of some of the economies, and so goes the energy. And so if we do get some, some continued improvement or on the studies of the stage 3 trials, with Pfizer, J&J, some other companies that are in the stage 3 trials that haven't had as many hiccups, is it something that the markets would, I think, explode higher in terms of value if people thought that there was a cure or a virus that was going to be widely available to the general public around the globe here in the next few months.
Right. Actually, Chris, what you mentioned just reminded me of another thing, which is that when you talk about energy, green sectors have been quite popular in the recent years, and I understand that the Trump administration is keen on it, but the Biden administration is even more in favor of these companies and these counters. So we have here the top performing renewable energy counters from last week. So how do you expect counters like Jinko Solar and First Solar and the sector as a whole to perform in the months ahead?
Well, if you listen to any think tank or group in the United States, the only thing that's going to be able to replace energy like we know it today is really the sun. So First Solar, Jinko Solar Holdings, like these companies are really focused on terms of continuing to improve, solar panels and the way that the energy is harnessed, the price, the size of the panels, all these things are something that on a longer term basis that is going to make the U.S. and the globe less dependent on combustible, engines and gasoline and things that pollute the world. So it is something that the Biden administration has said that they will be focused on. Not that the Trump administration has gone away from that totally, but it's something that the Biden administration is kind of pointing more towards. And I think if you did see a Democratic administration in the office come here in the middle part of this week, that this would benefit some of these solar renewable energy companies like First Solar and like Jinko Solar Holdings.
Right, Chris. So actually, this is a sector that I've not particularly been fond of investing in, but based on your comments, I'm actually having a change of heart now. So
so sometimes, Mala, I think this area, maybe the sector is not as sexy as big tech, but it is definitely something in the long term as we continue to get away and from renewable, go towards renewable energy is something that is an area that will continue to grow as a focus.
Yes. So Chris, other than these three sectors that we have pointed out and we have just discussed, are there any other sectors that you reckon our viewers should be looking at right now as we go ahead towards the election, as whether a Biden administration wins or a Trump administration wins? Is there anything that you could point our viewers to?
Yeah, look, I think two areas that you will see lots of activity around is on the big U.S. banks and regional banks in the United States in terms of if it's Joe Biden and his administration that gets elected into the White House, this possibly could be some headwinds in terms of not only regulations, around the big banks, but also in terms of corporate tax, because I touched on that earlier. So that's going to be an area of interest to investors around the globe is big banks. And then the second one is energy, because you've heard this kind of go back and forth in some of the debates with Joe Biden and President Trump in terms of, the fracking, in terms of how the energy markets are going to be, taxed in the United States. And then Saudi Arabia throws their kind of hat in the ring, so to speak, this week and saying that they might actually start cutting oil costs to the Asian customers. So we've seen a lot of activity in the oil futures being driven down over the last few days, down to that about $34 handle.
Yep. So against this volatile climate, and I think Chris, earlier in our discussion, you also mentioned the word volatility. So I just want to ask, what tips can you give to our viewers as they trade in this very volatile and uncertain market?
Yeah, so if you look at just market volatility, so market volatility is close to 40, so 38. So what does that really mean? You hear people talk about it. It's the fear gauge or the fear factor of the priced into the market. So at a 38 level on the VIX, the volatility index, that means that there's some downward risk being priced into the market. So how can you take advantage of this? So generally, in terms of high volatility, the options prices are generally higher. So whether you want to maybe hedge some of your portfolio, with, let's say, the SPY, which is the S&P 500 ETF, selling those calls against your portfolio, you actually get a higher premium right now. So there are some certain strategies that we talked about a few weeks ago in terms of in a higher volatility market, like what can we do other than simply buying and selling stock? So if you are nervous about your overall position and you don't know what's going to be the outcome for the election come here Tuesday night, basically being able to use options, so options trading strategies like selling put spreads or selling covered calls. These are two strategies that help you kind of add some income into your portfolio without actually removing, the upside gains that you might potentially have if the markets were to go in the favor of your positions. So this is, we talk about this and we show this on our education center in our trading platform. and the tdameritrade.com.sg. We'll actually walk you through videos in terms of popular strategies, in terms of high volatility, like we're in right now, heading into an election period, that you can actually hedge or take advantage of short-term opportunities by putting on certain types of option strategies that would benefit towards the high volatility period that we are seeing.
Yes. Thanks, Chris. I mean, it's really hard to say with certainty if Biden or Trump will win the elections for now, so we will just have to wait and see. But I think the insightful comments that you have given us really will give our viewers some form of direction on how they can trade in this very uncertain climate. So with that, we have come to the end of this week's Brokers Digest. To our viewers, we hope these strategies help you in your investment decisions, whether or not the Biden administration comes into power. So to check out the investment page on the Edge Singapore website or the TD Ameritrade Education Center that Chris mentioned earlier. Also, please check out our last episode on how the markets will possibly respond to a Trump win, as well as our previous episodes on how to trade options. So do like us on Facebook and Instagram to be alerted on next week's episode. We will be uncovering more insightful investment tips that you won't want to miss. Do also leave your comments below in the comment section if you have any areas that you would like for us to discuss with Chris. So I'm Amala Balakrishna. With me is Christopher Brankin, and we'll see you again next week. Take care. Goodbye.